The elevator hummed softly as it climbed to the 40th floor, each ding tightening the knot in Emily Carter's chest. It was her third week at Helios Dynamics, and, already, she felt like a small note in a grand, complicated symphony. Outside, the city of Chicago glittered beneath the morning fog, glass towers rising through the clouds like quiet giants. Inside, Emily's world was measured in deadlines, checklists, and the steady tap of her own nervous fingers on the desk. Then came him. Ethan Ward. 38, brilliant, composed. The kind of man whose presence filled a room before he even spoke. To everyone else, he was the legend on the top floor. To Emily, he was the reason her heart raced and her stomach turned in the same breath. That night, when the office lights dimmed and loneliness hummed louder than the machines, she whispered into her phone, "He's arrogant, self-absorbed, but God, he's beautiful." It was supposed to be a private voice note, but sometimes fate has a cruel sense of humor, because the next morning, the man she called arrogant had already heard every word, and what followed wasn't anger. It was something far more dangerous, something that would change the way Emily saw power, love, and her own worth forever. So, what really happens when the wrong message reaches the right heart? The sound of keyboards filled the morning air like rain tapping softly against glass. On the 34th floor of Helios Dynamics, sunlight spilled through wide windows, pooling across rows of chrome desks and screens that never seemed to rest. Emily Carter sat near the end of the row, quiet, focused, her fingers dancing over the keys. A mug of black coffee, half forgotten, had gone cold beside her. It was 7:48 a.m., 12 minutes before official hours began, but she'd already been there for an hour. That was Emily early, organized, always trying to stay one step ahead of chaos. From her corner, she could see the skyline stretching beyond the lake, sharp and distant. She dreamed of this view once the glass towers, the hum of ambition, the idea of being part of something bigger than herself. But dreams, she was learning, came with rules. And in a place like Helios, the rules had names. At the very top of those names was one Ethan Ward. People spoke his name the way one might mention a storm, quiet, reverent, half afraid it might hear them. He was 38, the genius behind Helios's meteoric rise, a man whose confidence could silence a room before he even spoke. Sharp suits, sharper words. And though Emily had never spoken to him directly, she felt his presence in everything, the precision of the schedules, the speed of decisions, even the way people lowered their voices when the elevator chimed from the 40th floor. That morning, the air shifted, the elevator doors slid open, and for a moment, all sounds seemed to pause. Ethan Ward stepped out, crisp and composed, eyes locked on something invisible, yet absolute. He didn't look around. He didn't need to. He was the kind of man who moved through space as if the world rearranged itself around him. Emily lowered her eyes, instinctively, pretending to adjust a file. Still. Her pulse picked up. She wasn't the kind of woman who crushed on her boss. She told herself that, over and over. But when his reflection brushed past hers in the polished glass, she couldn't help noticing the quiet gravity he carried. There was something magnetic and terrifying about being noticed by a man like that. "Morning, Emily," came a soft voice beside her. It was Lily from HR, whispering like they were in church. "He's having the executive briefing downstairs today. Everyone's on edge." Emily nodded, pretending not to care. "Guess I'd better make sure the reports are perfect then." She didn't realize her hand was trembling slightly until she spilled a drop of coffee on her notes. A small thing, but in a place where perfection was expected. Even a stain felt like a crack in glass. When the briefing started, she was there only to take notes invisible, like air in the corner of the boardroom. Ethan's voice filled the space deep, calm, precise. Numbers rolled off his tongue as if they belonged to him. Strategies, forecasts, projections all under his control. People nodded when he spoke, hesitated when he paused, watched his face for signs of approval. Emily's eyes moved between her notepad and his reflection on the screen. She wasn't just listening to what he said, she was trying to understand how someone could be that certain, that untouchable. And for a second, she felt something strange. Admiration, envy, maybe both. When the meeting ended, the air seemed to relax again. She packed up quietly, careful not to draw attention. When a familiar scent cedar and something faintly metallic, like rain on steel, brushed past her, she froze. "Good work on the data prep," Ethan said briefly, without looking up from his tablet. It was just 5 words. But to Emily, it was everything. A spark in the fog, recognition, proof she wasn't entirely invisible. He walked away before she could answer, leaving behind the faint echo of polished shoes and the smell of his cologne. For the rest of the day, Emily floated somewhere between pride and panic. It was ridiculous. She knew. He probably said that to everyone. But when you'd spent weeks being the quiet one behind the screen, even a passing compliment could feel like sunlight after days of gray. That night, as the office emptied and the city lights blinked on, one by one, Emily stayed behind, finishing up the quarterly budget sheets. The hum of machines filled the silence. She took off her glasses, rubbed her eyes, and let herself whisper a thought she'd never dare speak aloud. He's so sure of himself. It's infuriating. Her voice sounded small in the vast room, but maybe that's what makes him unforgettable. She laughed softly, shaking her head. Focus. Emily, he's your boss, not a daydream. Still, when she gathered her things, her phone buzzed a reminder from her friend, Rachel. "Don't forget, call me when you get home." She smiled, recording a quick voice note. "Long day, new job's intense, my boss. Honestly, he's arrogant, self-absorbed." She hesitated, glancing at the skyline glowing beyond the glass. "But God, he's beautiful." A sigh, a half laugh. Then she pressed send and didn't notice the small detail that would change everything, the contact name glowing at the top of the screen. Ethan Ward. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows of Helios Tower. Inside, on the 40th floor, a notification chimed on a sleek black phone resting on a mahogany desk. A single message, a single voice. And though Emily didn't know it yet, the words she'd whispered into the dark had just found their way into the one person she never meant to reach. Some accidents begin quietly, with a heartbeat, a message, and the smallest mistake in the world. The conference room smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh ink that clean, sharp scent of nerves and new beginnings. Emily sat near the far end of the long table, notebook open, pen ready, heart pounding a little too fast. This was her first strategy meeting, her first chance to see how the real decisions were made, not from behind her desk, not from a spreadsheet, but here, at the table where the future of Helios Dynamics was shaped. The air was thick with tension, quiet conversations layered over the hum of the city below. Every seat was taken by someone who looked older, sharper, more certain than she'd ever feel. Then the door opened. It wasn't loud, just the soft click of hinges, but the moment it happened, every whisper died. Ethan Ward stepped in, a tablet in one hand, a cup of black coffee in the other, his posture as composed as a drawn line. He didn't need to clear his throat or ask for silence. Silence followed him on its own. Emily felt at first that shift in the air. Like gravity had chosen a new direction, her pen slipped slightly in her fingers as he crossed the room and took his seat at the head of the table. "Good morning," he said. His voice carried a calm authority, low and steady, like the kind of storm you didn't see coming until it was right above you. Everyone murmured the same reply. Emily didn't. She just looked down at her notes, trying not to look at him. But her eyes betrayed her. He spoke about revenue growth, expansion strategy, new product launches, Numbers and goals and timelines, each word precise, each phrase measured. He didn't use filler words, didn't need to. Every sentence had weight. Emily watched the way he handled questions, never rushed, never defensive. He didn't dominate the room by raising his voice. He did it by knowing everything, every number, every decision, every possible answer before the question even finished. When one executive stumbled over a projection, Ethan simply turned his gaze, calm but unblinking. "Try that again," he said softly. It wasn't cruel, but it made the man shrink an inch in his chair. Emily's pulse quickened. There was something hypnotic about the way he worked, focused, cold, efficient. The kind of person who built empires without breaking a sweat. The kind of person she could never be. Yet she couldn't look away. He stood then, walking toward the board where graphs glowed faintly on the screen. "Helios isn't just competing," he said. "We're setting the pace. The question isn't who follows us, it's how far ahead we want to go." A pause, a heartbeat of silence, then a quiet nod from nearly everyone in the room. Emily's throat felt dry. She scribbled something, a meaningless note, just to steady her hand. When his gaze swept across the table, for a second, she thought it stopped on her. Her stomach flipped. Did he recognize her? Of course not. She was just the admin from floor 34. Invisible. Replaceable. Still. That single glance felt like it had cracked open something she didn't want to name. The meeting went on. Pages turned. Voices rose and faded. Emily kept taking notes she barely understood, trying to look calm, collected. Then, halfway through a discussion about market forecasts, Ethan said, "Emily Carter, you handled the data sheets this week. Correct her name." Her name, from his voice. Every head turned toward her. Her pen froze midair. "Yes, sir," she managed. Her voice sounded softer than she wanted it to. He gave a small nod. "Your format was efficient. Keep it consistent for next quarter." It was nothing, a simple acknowledgement, but for Emily, it felt like the room had tilted, just slightly, in her direction. She nodded back, pulse drumming in her ears. Of course. He moved on instantly, already focused on the next slide. And yet, something lingered in the air, a faint warmth, a thread between them that no one else could see. When the meeting ended, everyone rushed to pack up, relieved it was over. Emily stayed seated a few seconds longer, pretending to organize her notes. She wanted to breathe, to let her heart settle before she stood. She glanced at him once more. He was speaking to the COO, head tilted slightly, expression unreadable, the kind of look that could mean everything or nothing. Then, for a fraction of a moment, his eyes flicked to her again. Quick, sharp, curious. She looked away first. Outside the room, her heels clicked softly against the marble floor, echoing down the corridor. The sound followed her like a secret she hadn't meant to carry. In the elevator, she caught her reflection, flushed cheeks, slightly trembling hands, the faintest smile she didn't recognize. It scared her a little, because admiration was easy, respect was safe. But whatever had just sparked between admiration and fear, that was something else entirely. She pressed the button for floor 34 and exhaled slowly. Around her, the elevator hummed, steady and mechanical, the world moving as it always did. But somewhere deep inside, she knew this morning had changed something. Not in the company, not in the numbers, in her. The doors opened, and the sound of keyboards returned, familiar and comforting. She walked back to her desk, set down her notes, and stared at the mug still half full from earlier. Her hand hovered over it for a moment, then she smiled faintly. The coffee had gone cold, but for the first time since she joined Helios, she didn't feel the same, because beneath the layers of hierarchy and fear and admiration, something small, dangerous, and alive had begun to stir. And Emily Carter, the quiet admin who always arrived early and left late, was no longer invisible, at least, not to herself. Outside, clouds gathered over the city. Somewhere above, on the 40th floor. Ethan Ward reviewed another set of numbers, unaware that the next time their paths crossed, nothing between them would feel quite as simple again. By the time the office lights dimmed and the sky over Chicago burned gold and gray, most desks on the 34th floor had already gone silent. Monitors glowed faintly in the half-dark, humming like tired hearts still trying to keep rhythm. Emily stayed, of course. She always stayed. It wasn't ambition, not really, more like a quiet fear of being forgotten if she stopped moving. The day's meeting still lingered in her mind, the echo of Ethan Ward's voice, the way every sentence carried weight, the way he'd said her name like it mattered, just one line of recognition, and somehow it had followed her all afternoon, as if her body hadn't quite decided whether to blush or to breathe. She closed the last spreadsheet, exhaled, and leaned back. The office looked different at night, softer, more human. The glass walls no longer reflected deadlines and targets, just the city pulsing below. Headlights sliding like slow constellations along Michigan Avenue. Her phone buzzed. Rachel, the one friend who could always tell when Emily's thoughts had gone spinning too fast. "Call me. I want the gossip," the text read, with 3 heart emojis. Emily smiled, shaking her head. She picked up the phone, opened the chat, and pressed record. Her voice came out low, tired, honest. "Hey, Rach. Surviving week 3. You'd be proud I didn't trip over my own nerves today." A small laugh escaped her. Then, softer, "But my boss, Ethan Ward, he's something else." She paused, eyes drifting to the skyline again. "He's arrogant, completely sure of himself. Probably thinks gravity works for him first." Another pause, a smile now, involuntary. "But he's beautiful. Rach. Like, unfairly beautiful. The kind of face that makes you forget what you were mad about." A long breath. Then she whispered, "Anyway, don't you dare tell anyone I said that." And with that, she hit send, absent-minded, one thumb swipe too quick, and dropped the phone onto her desk. Outside, thunder rolled faintly over the lake. The office lights flickered once. Emily yawned, stretched, and began shutting everything down. It wasn't until she reached for her coat that she noticed the small red bubble on the screen. Message sent to Ethan Ward. For a second, her brain refused to understand what she was seeing. She blinked, stared harder. The contact photo Helios logo, not Rachel's smiling face. Her stomach dropped. No, 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 no. She snatched the phone, heart thudding so loudly it drowned out everything else. Maybe it hadn't gone through. Maybe there was a glitch. Her fingers trembled as she tapped the message thread. It had gone through. Blue check. Red. Oh my God. Her knees went weak. She sank into the chair, one hand covering her mouth, the other still gripping the phone like it could undo what it had done. Her voice, her stupid, unfiltered, why did I say that voice now lived in his phone? She replayed the moment in her head, the words tumbling over each other like broken glass. He's arrogant, but beautiful. Each syllable stabbed deeper. What would he think that she was mocking him, flirting with him? Both, she buried her face in her hands and let out a quiet groan that echoed through the empty office. Minutes passed. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. Mercilessly calm. She checked the screen again. Still nothing. No reply. No dots typing. Just her words, sitting there, glowing like evidence. Her mind ran wild tomorrow morning. Security waiting at her desk. HR calling her in. Ethan Ward standing there, calm and composed, saying in that even tone, "This kind of behavior is unprofessional." Miss Carter. Her breath hitched. She could already hear it. She thought about deleting the app, quitting, changing her name, moving to another state anywhere but here. But then, in the middle of her panic, something strange happened. A small laugh, helpless, shaky, escaped her. Because really, what could be more her than this working late, overthinking everything, then accidentally confessing admiration to her boss through technology. The absurdity of it made her laugh harder until it turned into a sigh. She leaned back, staring up at the ceiling lights, their glow blurring behind tears she hadn't noticed forming. Maybe it wasn't just admiration. Maybe it was exhaustion or loneliness. Maybe it was something she didn't dare name yet. The clock on her screen read 8:43 p.m. Too late to fix anything. Too early to pretend it didn't matter. She stood, grabbed her bag, and walked toward the elevator. Each step echoed like a countdown to disaster. The glass doors reflected her face, pale, worried, but still holding on to a thin line of humor, the kind that came when you were too terrified to cry. Arrogant, but beautiful, she murmured under her breath. What kind of person says that out loud? The elevator doors closed, sealing her inside the mirrored box. Her reflection looked back, same brown hair, same steady eyes, but something in her expression had shifted, a mix of dread and curiosity. When she reached the lobby, the security guard waved goodnight. She forced a smile and stepped out into the drizzle. The night air smelled of rain and pavement and something bittersweet. By the time she reached her car, the city lights had turned into soft smudges on wet glass. She sat behind the wheel, phone in hand, thumb hovering over the screen again, waiting for a reply that never came. Maybe he hadn't listened yet. Maybe he'd delete it. Maybe tomorrow she could pretend it never happened. But deep down, she knew better. Because once you let words go, once you give them a voice, they stop belonging only to you. And somewhere, 40 floors above her, a man she barely knew might be listening, hearing her voice, her laugh, her trembling honesty. Emily closed her eyes, resting her forehead against the steering wheel. The sound of the rain grew softer, steady, like a lullaby trying to promise that everything would be fine. But her heart wouldn't listen. In that fragile, uncertain silence, one truth settled quietly inside her. Tomorrow, nothing would ever feel quite the same again. The sky was still half dark when Emily parked her car outside Helios Tower. She hadn't really slept, just drifted in and out of shallow dreams where her phone kept buzzing and Ethan Ward's voice kept saying her name. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the blue check mark on that message, glowing like a sentence waiting to be carried out. Her stomach twisted as she stepped into the lobby. The marble floor gleamed too bright. The air smelled too clean. Every sound, heels clicking, phones ringing. The distant hum of elevators felt sharper than usual, like the whole building knew what she'd done. She smiled stiffly at the security guard, swiped her badge, and entered the elevator. Floor 34 lit up in soft yellow. She pressed her back against the mirrored wall and whispered to her reflection. Maybe he hasn't listened to it yet. But the words didn't convince her. Not really. The doors opened. She walked to her desk, heartbeat loud enough to drown the hum of computers. Her workspace looked ordinary, the same mug, same stack of reports, same small plant by the window, except for one thing. A white sheet of paper lay in the center of her desk, folded once, clean edges perfectly aligned. Her hand froze midair. No one left handwritten notes in this office. Ever. Slowly, she reached for it. The paper trembled slightly between her fingers. It was simple, written in blue ink, sharp and neat. I prefer to be called focused rather than arrogant. Thank you for the honest review. Atsamu, Her breath caught. For a long second, she just stared, half horrified, half relieved he'd heard it. Of course he had. But he wasn't angry. He wasn't even defensive. He'd answered with humor, a calm, deliberate kind that somehow felt more dangerous than rage. Emily sank slowly into her chair, the note still in her hand. Her face burned. She wanted to crawl under the desk, vanish, maybe transfer to another country. But under the embarrassment, something else stirred, a strange, reluctant smile. Focused, not arrogant. The man had a sense of humor, and maybe a heart. She placed the note down carefully, like it was fragile glass. Then she noticed the handwriting again, precise, controlled, a mirror of the man himself. Every letter looked like it had been drawn with purpose. Great, she muttered to herself. Even his penmanship has confidence issues. Her coworker Lily arrived a few minutes later, tossing her bag onto the desk beside hers. Morning, you look like you've seen a ghost. Emily blinked quickly, folding the note and slipping it into her drawer. Just didn't sleep much, she said. Big meeting. You could say that, Lily shrugged, already opening her laptop. Well, coffee's fresh in the lounge. You'll need it if the CEO's in today. Rumor says he's reviewing the new admin protocols. Emily's throat went dry. He's already upstairs. Came in early. Classic Ethan Ward. Of course he had. The man probably never slept. All morning, Emily worked in a fog. Every email, every task felt like walking on glass. Each time her inbox pinged, she flinched. Each time the elevator dinged on her floor, her heart skipped. She kept replaying the note in her mind. Thank you for the honest review. Was that sarcasm? Was it forgiveness? Or was it just Ethan being Ethan controlled? Unreadable. 2 steps ahead of everyone. At 10:00 am, the sound she'd been dreading finally came. The elevator. The soft chime that made the air in the entire floor hold its breath. Her fingers froze over her keyboard. Footsteps, steady, even, unhurried. The kind of footsteps that belonged to someone who never needed to rush. Ethan Ward walked past the cubicles, nodding slightly at a few managers. He was dressed in gray today, no tie, sleeves rolled once, calm. Effortlessly in command, Emily felt her pulse in her throat. She looked down, pretending to type. Don't make eye contact. Don't breathe too loudly. Maybe he'd just walk by, but he didn't. He stopped, right beside her desk. Morning, Ms. Carter. His voice low, polite, carrying just a hint of amusement. Emily turned slowly, forcing a professional smile. Good morning, Mr. Ward. He tilted his head slightly, eyes calm but searching. Rough night. Her heart stuttered. He knew. Of course he knew. Not really, just long, she stammered. He nodded, the corner of his mouth lifting just a little. Try to get some rest tonight. The next few weeks will be busy. And then, just like that, he was gone. The scent of his cologne lingered in the air, clean, quiet, like cedar and rain. Emily stared after him, every nerve in her body still buzzing. When she finally sat down again, she realized her hands were shaking. Not from fear anymore, from something else she didn't want to name. The rest of the day blurred past meetings, emails, lunch she barely touched. But every time her mind drifted, she saw the folded note, saw the quick glint in Ethan's eyes when he said, "Rough night." Was he teasing her, or was there something softer hiding under that calm tone by the time she left the office? Dusk had turned the city gold again. She paused at the glass doors, looking back once more at the row of lights above. On the 40th floor, a shadow moved behind the blinds, tall, steady, unmistakable. Ethan Ward, still working. Emily smiled faintly. Focused, she whispered, right. And for the first time since the voice note disaster, she didn't feel quite so small, just awake. She slipped the note back out of her drawer, folded it tighter, and tucked it into her notebook before leaving. Outside, the wind carried the chill of early autumn through the streets. Traffic glowed red and white in the distance. And as Emily walked to her car, her heart was lighter, confused, nervous, but lighter. Somewhere between fear and relief, a spark had quietly begun to glow. She didn't know it yet, but that tiny spark, that unexpected kindness in ink, would become the first thread of something far more complicated than she'd ever planned for. And tomorrow, that thread would pull tighter. The rain hadn't stopped since dawn. It drummed softly against the glass walls of Helios, a steady rhythm that seemed to echo inside Emily's chest. By 10 a.m., she'd already spilled coffee twice, deleted the same email draft 3 times, and checked her reflection in the monitor more often than she'd admit. The note from yesterday sat folded neatly in her drawer, a secret heartbeat beneath the surface of her otherwise careful world. She had convinced herself that the storm had passed, that maybe Ethan Ward had decided to let the incident fade into silence. But silence, she was learning, could be deceptive. At 10:27, her phone rang the internal line. She froze. That line never rang for her. A low, calm voice came through the receiver. "Ms. Carter, could you step into my office for a moment?" Just that. No explanation, no tone to cling to. Her stomach tightened. "Yes, of course. Mr. Ward," she managed, though her voice cracked halfway through his name. As she stood, Lily glanced up from her desk. "Everything okay?" Emily gave a small, shaky smile. "I'll let you know if I still have a job in 10 minutes. The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt endless. Each second stretched thin, punctuated by the soft hum of the cables. When the doors opened, she stepped out into silence. No chatter, no footsteps, just the faint ticking of a clock and the low murmur of rain outside. His assistant wasn't there, just the sleek glass door, half open, light spilling across the polished floor. She knocked gently. "Come in," came that familiar voice, smooth, unhurried. Ethan Ward stood near the window, sleeves rolled, hands in his pockets. Behind him, the skyline was swallowed by gray clouds, a pale reflection of the calm that seemed to wrap around him like armor. "Mr. Ward," she began softly, standing by the door. He turned. His expression was unreadable, not cold, not kind, just measured. The kind of face that could hold a boardroom in silence. "I wanted to discuss something with you," he said, his tone calm, almost conversational. "About your evaluation." The word caught in her throat. "What, your message?" he clarified. "The one I wasn't supposed to hear?" Her heart sank straight to the floor. She tried to speak, but the words tangled in her mouth. "Mr. Ward. That was an accident. I would never." He raised a hand, quiet but commanding. "Relax. Ms. Carter, I'm not offended. That didn't help. If anything, it made her more nervous." She shifted her weight, hands gripping the strap of her notebook like it could anchor her. "I just thought," he continued, taking a slow step closer, "that if we're going to work together effectively, I should understand your perspective." "My perspective." "You called me arrogant," he said plainly, "and self-absorbed." Her face went crimson. I didn't mean it wasn't professional." "True," he interrupted, the faintest trace of amusement in his eyes. "But honest." The silence that followed felt alive like static. Outside, thunder rumbled far away. He walked back to his desk, picked up the note she thought he'd forgotten. "You see, I actually appreciated this," he said, glancing at the handwriting. "Not many people around here tell me what they think." Emily blinked. "Well, not everyone accidentally sends you their opinions by voice note." He smiled then, a small, quiet curve of his lips that somehow made her pulse stutter. Maybe they should. The way he said it, not teasing, not patronizing, just real, almost thoughtful. For a moment, she forgot she was terrified. "I didn't mean to sound disrespectful," she murmured. "It was just frustration. You expect so much from everyone, and you never seem tired or uncertain. Would you prefer if I did?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. She opened her mouth, then closed it. "No, I think it makes people feel human. To see a little imperfection." He studied her, quiet. "And you don't think I'm human?" She swallowed. "I think you hide it well." For the first time, his expression softened not into a smile, but into something more difficult to name. Reflection, maybe, or respect. He turned back toward the window, speaking almost to the city. I wasn't always like this. His tone dropped, low and distant. Helios wasn't supposed to survive the first 2 years. I built something out of failure. Ms. Carter. Sometimes that leaves edges. She watched him, the way his shoulders seemed both steady and tired, the way his reflection blurred against the storm clouds outside. It was the first time she saw him, not as the unreachable CEO, but as a man, one who had fought too long to afford softness. He turned again, eyes meeting hers. So, arrogant, perhaps, but earned. A pause. Then, almost gently, "What would you call it now?" Emily's heart raced. She could have laughed, apologized, changed the subject. But instead, she spoke honestly, driven. She said quietly, intense, maybe lonely. The last word slipped out before she could stop it. Something flickered in his expression, a brief, unguarded moment. Then he nodded slowly, almost as if he agreed. "Well," he said, voice lighter now, "I'll take that over self-absorbed." She finally let out a shaky breath, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Glad we cleared that up?" "Good," he said, stepping around the desk. "Now we can move forward." As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "Ms. Carter." She turned back. "Next time you have feedback," he said, that teasing glint returning, "feel free to schedule a meeting instead of sending voice notes." Her cheeks flamed. "Understood, sir." He nodded once, satisfied, and returned to his work as if nothing monumental had just happened. Emily walked out, her heartbeat still uneven, her thoughts a mess of relief, confusion, and something strangely electric. The elevator doors closed around her, muting the sound of the rain. She pressed her back to the wall and let out a quiet laugh. It wasn't joy. It wasn't fear. It was something in between, that dizzy space where one mistake turns into the start of something you can't name yet. Outside. The rain began to ease, and high above the city, behind glass and steel, Ethan Ward looked out over the skyline, his reflection faint in the window, and allowed himself a small, unreadable smile. Because maybe, just maybe, the woman who dared to call him arrogant had seen him more clearly than anyone else ever had. The hum of the espresso machine was the only sound in the break lounge that afternoon. It was one of those slow midweek hours when the building seemed to exhale, fluorescent lights softened, phones stopped ringing, and time stretched just a little. Emily stood by the counter, waiting for the coffee to finish dripping. Her hands were wrapped around her mug, more for comfort than caffeine. She had survived an entire week without tripping over another professional disaster. That alone felt like a small miracle. The door opened behind her with a quiet click. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. The air shifted, the subtle scent of cedar and rain, the calm presence that somehow filled a room without trying. "Mr. Ward," she said automatically, turning halfway, careful not to spill her coffee. "Emily," he greeted simply, crossing to the other counter. His voice carried the same composed warmth that could either melt or terrify, depending on the day. He reached for the machine beside her, their sleeves brushed, just barely enough to send a small current through her arm. "Didn't expect to see you here," she said, forcing a smile. "I thought CEOs had their coffee brewed by some secret team on the top floor." That earned her a quiet laugh, not loud, but real. "Sometimes I like to remind myself how the machine works." His tone made her smile despite herself. "And still remember." He glanced at the mug, one brow lifting, barely. They stood in silence for a few seconds, the soft hiss of steam between them. Emily took a sip, letting the warmth calm her nerves. "Listen," she said finally, before she could lose courage. "About the message, and the note, and the well. Everything." He turned slightly, leaning a hip against the counter, giving her his full attention. "You're still thinking about that?" Her laugh came out awkward, small. It's not exactly something people forget. I called my boss arrogant, out loud. He studied her for a moment, then shrugged lightly. You also called me beautiful. That balanced it out. Her cheeks burned. You remember that part? He smiled that subtle, disarming kind of smile that didn't need effort. Hard to forget when someone says it with that much conviction. She groaned softly, pressing her palm to her forehead. Please tell me this conversation never leaves this room. Scout's honor, he said. Though I can't promise I won't bring it up during performance reviews. She looked up sharply, then saw the amusement flicker in his eyes. You're teasing me, she said. A little. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It hummed with something else, a quiet recognition, a shared humanness neither had expected to find here, in a world of deadlines and power suits. He reached for his cup. You've been doing good work, Emily. The compliment caught her off guard. Thank you. I'm still figuring things out. We all are, he said. Even me. She tilted her head, studying him. I find that hard to believe. Then maybe you've been looking at the numbers too much, he said softly. There it was again, that glimmer of honesty, that tiny crack in the armor. It made her brave enough to say what had been sitting in her chest since that first meeting. You're demanding, she said. Sometimes impossible. But you also make people want to do better. You make them care. He looked at her then. Really looked. The room seemed to go still. Her words hung in the air, simple and true. She felt her heartbeat climb, afraid she'd said too much, afraid she'd read him wrong. But then he laughed, quiet, surprised, almost boyish. That's quite the combination. She smiled, relief washing over her. Take it as a compliment. I do, he said, his voice lower now. It's rare. He took a sip of his coffee, eyes never quite leaving hers. There was no arrogance in his gaze now, just curiosity, warmth, maybe even admiration. For the first time, she saw something different in him. Not the untouchable CEO everyone whispered about, but a man who might actually be listening, maybe even enjoying her company. Do you always speak this honestly? He asked. Only when I'm terrified, she said, half joking. Then I suppose I should terrify you more often. She laughed, really laughed, and the sound seemed to soften the entire room. For a moment, it felt like they were just two people on a quiet afternoon, sharing coffee and laughter like equals. Then the spell broke the hallway, outside stirred with footsteps, a few voices approaching. He glanced toward the door, then back at her. We should probably not give them gossip material. Right, she said, finishing the last sip of her coffee, trying not to notice how her hands trembled just slightly. As she passed him to leave, he said, almost casually, Emily. She stopped, turned halfway. Don't lose that honesty, he said, even when it's inconvenient. Something in his tone made her pause soft, steady, the kind of sincerity that didn't ask for a reply. She nodded once, quietly. I'll try not to. He smiled. Good. Outside. The fluorescent lights felt colder, the noise of the office sharper, but Emily carried something warm inside her, a pulse of connection she hadn't expected. In the elevator, she caught her reflection in the glass again, same tired face, same careful expression, but her eyes were different now. Lighter, curious, alive. Back at her desk, she opened her drawer to see the folded note once more. She traced the initials E.W. at the bottom with her thumb and smiled faintly. Maybe mistakes, she thought, had a strange way of leading you to the right conversations. And somewhere upstairs, Ethan Ward sat at his desk, coffee untouched, a small grin playing on his lips. The rain had stopped, but something new, something unspoken had just begun to fall quietly between them. By late afternoon, the building had settled into its usual rhythm, the hum of printers, the echo of muted footsteps, the quiet rush of wind between the glass towers of Chicago. Emily was wrapping up her reports when her phone lit up. The message was short, precise, and signed with two letters that still made her heartbeat stumble every time she saw them. 4P Mem, my office. EW. She stared at it for a full 10 seconds before breathing again. Her first thought was, did I do something wrong? Her second, why does that sound so personal? By the time the elevator reached the 40th floor, her palms were already damp. The hallway outside his office was quiet, the carpet thick enough to swallow her footsteps. Through the glass, she could see him standing by the window, back turned, jacket off, sleeves rolled halfway. The city stretched out behind him like a living painting. She knocked softly. "Come in." His voice was calm, low, steady, the kind of tone that always made her forget what she meant to say. "Mr. Ward," she began, closing the door behind her. "You wanted to see me." He turned then, eyes finding hers instantly. There was no trace of anger in them, just focused that same unshakable calm that somehow made her even more nervous. "Yes," he said. "Please, sit." She obeyed, setting her notebook on her lap, pretending to look prepared. He didn't sit right away. He leaned against the edge of the desk, arms folded loosely, studying her like he was trying to solve something unseen. "You've been here a little over a month now," he said. "Yes, sir. And in that month, you've managed to impress almost everyone on your team." She blinked, startled. "I thank you. I just try to do the work." He nodded slowly. "You do more than that. You notice things. You adapt quickly. You ask the right questions." A faint smile tugged at his mouth, even when they're inconvenient. Her chest tightened. Was he talking about that conversation in the lounge before she could answer? He continued. "I like people who think," he said softly. "It's rare around here." She looked down, trying to hide the heat rising in her cheeks. "Sometimes thinking gets me in trouble. Sometimes it gets you noticed." The room went quiet. Her breath caught. He wasn't smiling anymore, but his gaze steady, deliberate, held something else now. Something she didn't have a name for. She forced a small laugh, trying to ease the weight of his words. "So, is this a feedback session or an intervention?" He tilted his head, amused. "Maybe both." Finally, he moved to sit across from her, the desk now between them. "Tell me something honestly," he said. "What do you think of this place of Helios?" The question surprised her. "I think it's brilliant," she said carefully. "Demanding, unforgiving, sometimes, but inspiring." "And of me?" he asked quietly. Her heart skipped. "You really want me to answer that I do?" She hesitated. Then, softly, "You're demanding too, but not for the sake of control. You expect people to meet you at the level you live at." "And what level is that high?" she said. "Almost unreachable?" He leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on the desk. "You think I'm unreachable?" She held his gaze, uncertain whether it was safe to answer. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but not today." That last line slipped out too honest, too raw. But he didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled, small and quiet. "I'm glad to hear that." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The city outside was awash of gold and glass. The hum of distant traffic filled the silence between their breaths. Then, almost casually, he said, "You know, when you first joined, I noticed you right away." Her head lifted. "You noticed me." He nodded. "You were different. You didn't blend in like the others tried to. You listened, even when no one was talking. I could see your mind working." Emily's throat tightened. She tried to find something to say, but words refused to come. "That's not something I ignore," he added, voice low. The air between them changed. It wasn't just admiration or curiosity anymore. It was charged, alive. She could feel it, in the stillness of his gaze, in the warmth creeping up her neck. He stood then, walking around the desk until he was standing beside her chair. close enough that she could feel the faint scent of his cologne, something earthy and clean. "I didn't ask you here to talk about reports," he said quietly. Her pulse stumbled. "No?" He shook his head. "No." For a long moment, neither moved. It was as if the whole building had gone silent, the world outside holding its breath with them. His voice dropped lower. "Emily." She looked up, and in that single heartbeat, all the careful distance they'd built dissolved. He reached out slow, deliberate, his hand brushing lightly against her jaw, as if waiting for her to pull away. She didn't. The space between them closed, and the kiss that followed wasn't rushed or planned. It was quiet, warm, real. For a moment, the noise of the world disappeared. There was only the faint hum of the city below, the scent of coffee and rain, and the feeling of two people finally stepping past the line they'd both been pretending not to see. When he pulled back, it was gentle, almost reluctant. His forehead rested lightly against hers. "That was not on the agenda," he murmured. She let out a breathless laugh, her voice trembling. "No, but I don't regret it." His smile deepened, not arrogant, not guarded, just soft, human. "Good," he said quietly. "Neither do I." Outside, the last light of the day spilled through the windows, painting the room in gold. And as she left his office later, heart racing, the world felt different, like the air itself had shifted, holding a promise she didn't dare name yet. In her chest, something new had begun, fragile, uncertain, and impossibly alive. Chicago shimmered that night, the city lights flickering like quiet stars over the river. The air carried a soft chill, the kind that made you breathe slower, deeper, as if the world had briefly decided to be gentle. Emily stood outside the small French restaurant, tucked in a narrow corner of River North, hands clasped in front of her coat. She could hear the soft hum of jazz inside, the faint clink of glasses, the smell of butter and wine drifting out every time the door opened. She still wasn't sure how she'd said yes. One moment, Ethan had smiled that half-teasing, half-serious smile and said, "Dinner tonight." And before she'd had time to overthink, her heart had answered for her. When he arrived, she knew it before she even saw him. The quiet shift in the air, that calm, deliberate energy. He wore no tie, just a dark suit, collar open, confidence understated. When his eyes found her, the noise of the city seemed to fade. "Emily," he said simply. "Ethan." Her voice came out softer than she expected. He held the door for her, and she stepped into the warm glow of the restaurant candles flickering against brick walls, tables close enough for laughter to travel. They were seated near a window overlooking the river, where the water reflected the city's heartbeat in ribbons of gold. For a while, they talked about work, the safe things, projects, schedules, plans. But somewhere between the first glass of wine and the quiet arrival of the entrees, something in the conversation shifted. Ethan leaned back, eyes tracing the candlelight. "You know," he said, "people assume that confidence is something you're born with. It's not. It's what's left when fear stops winning." Emily looked at him, really looked. "Were you afraid?" "Always," he said softly. "Still am. Sometimes." It surprised her. The way he said it, no performance, no armor, just truth, simple and steady. He swirled his glass once, thinking, "My father was a military man, strict, proud, the kind of person who believed emotions were inefficiencies. I learned early that control meant survival, so I built a life around that, around control." She listened, quiet. The city outside moved in slow light, and for the first time, Ethan Ward looked less like the man who ruled the 40th floor, and more like someone who had learned strength the hard way. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked, "being softer?" He smiled faintly. "I wouldn't know what that feels like anymore." Her eyes softened. I think you still do. You just hide it better than most. He looked at her, then really looked. You have a dangerous habit of saying exactly what I don't expect to hear. Bad habit. He shook his head. No. Necessary one. A small pause settled between them. Not awkward, just real. Then he asked, "What about you?" "Emily. What did you want before all this?" She laughed quietly. "Before spreadsheets and deadlines, I wanted to be a photographer." His brows lifted slightly. "A photographer." She nodded. "I love the idea of catching moments people never notice. The small ones. The way light hits a window. The way someone looks at someone else when they think no one's watching." He leaned forward a little. "And why didn't you?" She hesitated, then shrugged. "Life, bills, stability. Turns out dreams don't pay rent in Chicago." He smiled, not out of pity, but understanding. "Still, you notice things," he said. "I've seen the way you watch the room before meetings. You read people. That's what photographers do, isn't it?" His words sank in quietly, like warmth spreading through her chest. "Maybe," she said, "maybe I never stopped." The waiter came and went, refilling glasses, clearing plates. The jazz deepened, low and slow, like a secret whispered under breath. By dessert, laughter had replaced nerves. She told him about her first terrible job, the broken copier that once caught fire. He told her about his early days, sleeping on a futon in an empty office, trying to convince investors he wasn't just another kid with a laptop and a dream. And somewhere between stories, she caught him watching her, not in the way men look when they want something, but in the way people look when they find something unexpected. Her heart skipped. What she asked softly. He smiled. "Nothing. Just wondering how I missed this version of you in the office." She grinned. "Maybe you never looked close enough." He laughed quietly. "Maybe not." Outside, the rain started thin, quiet lines running down the window. The world beyond the glass blurred, soft and unreal. He reached for the check, but she stopped him. "Let me pay my part." He raised a brow. "That's not how this works. This isn't a business dinner." "Ethan, no," he said, his tone lowering. "It's not." Her pulse fluttered. The way he said her name without the weight of professionalism, without titles, it felt new. He stood, offering his hand. "Come on. You'll miss the view." They stepped outside under the awning, the city shimmering around them. The rain had turned gentle, the river below catching every flicker of light. She looked up at him, the water reflecting in his eyes. "This was nice," she said. He nodded. It was. For a moment, neither moved. The noise of cars, footsteps, laughter, all of it faded into the distance. There was only the soft rhythm of rain and the fragile electricity hanging in the space between them. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his touch deliberate but hesitant, a question more than a gesture. She didn't answer with words. She just looked at him. And in her silence, he found permission. The kiss was unhurried, gentle, grounding, the kind that didn't demand but understood. It felt less like something beginning and more like something remembered. When they finally pulled apart, she let out a shaky breath, eyes still closed. He whispered, almost to himself, "You have a way of making time stop." She smiled, small and real. "Maybe it just slows down when you finally stop running." He laughed softly, brushing his thumb along her cheek before stepping back. The rain kept falling, light as breath, and as they walked toward the waiting car, side by side but not touching, the city lights followed them, quiet witnesses to something that felt impossibly fragile and perfectly alive. That night, when Emily lay awake in her small apartment, she could still taste the sweetness of red wine, still hear his laughter over the rain, and in that stillness before sleep, she realized something simple, terrifying, and beautiful. She wasn't just falling for Ethan Ward. She was beginning to see the man beneath the title. Monday morning came wrapped in sunlight and nerves. The air felt lighter somehow, the way it does when the weekend leaves a trace of something good behind. Emily walked into Helios Tower with a quiet smile, the city still waking around her, coffee warm in her hand, heart still carrying the softness of Friday night. She hadn't told anyone, not Lily, not even Rachel. The dinner, the laughter, the kiss that still lingered like a secret only the two of them knew. It wasn't about hiding, it was about holding something fragile close before the world could touch it. Upstairs, Ethan was already in his office. She saw the shadow of him through the glass wall, sleeves rolled, head bent slightly over a document. When he looked up and their eyes met, just for a heartbeat, everything else blurred. A small smile, barely there, but it was enough. All morning, she moved through her tasks with a quiet hum in her chest, the hum of being seen, the hum of being chosen. Until around 10:30, when the elevator chimed a tone sharper than usual, breaking through the calm. Heads turned, conversations paused. From behind the glass doors stepped a woman in a white suit, tailored, perfect, the kind of elegance that spoke before she did. She was tall, her dark hair pulled into a smooth knot, heels clicking with the certainty of someone who never had to introduce herself twice. Veronica Hale, someone whispered, investor from Los Angeles. The name rippled across the floor like a dropped stone in still water. Emily had heard it before, the kind of name attached to boardrooms, glossy magazine spreads, and rumors whispered between executives. She didn't look like someone who belonged to the past. She looked like someone who still mattered. And when she smiled at the receptionist, that smile poised, practiced, polished, Emily felt her own heart dip just slightly. Within minutes, the news spread. Veronica Hale was in Chicago to review Helios's new expansion deal. She would be meeting with Ethan directly, privately. Emily tried to focus on her spreadsheets, on the rhythm of numbers and reports, but her hands betrayed her. The same fingers that had felt steady days ago now trembled over the keyboard. She told herself it was silly, irrational. Ethan was professional. This was business. But when she saw Veronica step into the elevator that led to the 40th floor, her stomach twisted anyway. Hours passed. The office moved on, as if nothing had changed. But Emily felt the shift subtle, invisible, like the drop in air pressure before a storm. By the time her lunch break came, she couldn't ignore it anymore. She needed air. In the lounge, the scent of coffee was familiar, grounding. She poured herself a cup, willing her thoughts to quiet. That's when she heard the click of heels again, softer this time, closer. Emily Carter, a smooth voice said behind her. She turned. Veronica stood there, effortlessly composed, one hand resting lightly on the counter, her smile polite but edged with curiosity. Yes, Emily managed. I thought I'd meet the woman who runs this floor so seamlessly, Veronica said, eyes drifting briefly over her badge. Ethan speaks highly of you. Emily blinked. He does. A pause, then a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. He used to speak that way about me, too. The words landed like ice. I didn't mean to startle you, Veronica continued, still smiling, but I do know Ethan very well. We were close, once. Emily's pulse thudded. I see. He's a remarkable man, Veronica said, voice smooth as silk, brilliant. But he doesn't do halfway. You'll learn that, if you haven't already. There was no malice in her tone, just certainty. The kind that came from knowing someone too deeply. For a second, Emily couldn't breathe. She stared at the woman's perfect posture, perfect poise, and suddenly felt painfully aware of her own reflection in the glass. Soft lines, nervous eyes, the faintest tremor in her hand. Anyway, Veronica said lightly, turning toward the door, it's good to finally put a face to the name. I can see why he noticed you. And then she was gone, leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume and a silence that hummed with unspoken truths. Emily stood there for a long time, staring at the empty doorway, her chest tight. When she finally made it back to her desk, the elevator dinged again. Ethan stepped out, phone in hand, expression unreadable. He spoke briefly with his assistant, nodded once, then disappeared into his office. She waited for him to look her way. He didn't. The rest of the afternoon blurred into noise meetings, messages, the steady rhythm of work that no longer felt grounding. By 5, she could barely keep her focus. When the floor finally cleared, she gathered her things slowly, hoping maybe he'd stop her. Maybe he'd say anything to bridge the space that had suddenly grown between them. But the light in his office stayed on. His door stayed closed. She hesitated at the elevator, her reflection caught in the polished metal, a woman trying to look calm while the air around her cracked with questions she couldn't ask. Downstairs, the city had turned cold again. The wind off the river bit against her skin, sharp and real. She pulled her coat tighter, trying to shake the image of Veronica's smile, of Ethan's silence. Maybe this was nothing. Maybe it was just business. But deep down, she knew the feeling settling inside her wasn't about logic. It was about instinct, that quiet warning that something delicate was shifting. And once it did, nothing would fit quite the same again. She walked toward the parking lot, her footsteps echoing on the wet pavement. Above her, lights from the 40th floor still glowed against the night, steady, constant, unreachable. Emily looked up once more, the city blurring around her, and whispered to herself, "Don't overthink this." But her heart, restless and unsure, already knew that happiness, the kind that sneaks up quietly, can slip away just as quietly too. And somewhere high above, behind the glass and the hum of late-night work, Ethan Ward stood staring out at the same dark river, unaware that his past had just stepped back into his present, and that the woman downstairs was already beginning to pull away. The next morning felt heavier than it should have. The sun was out. The sky was clear, but for Emily, everything inside her moved slower, like the air had thickened overnight. She'd spent most of the weekend pretending nothing had changed, pretending she hadn't seen the look in Veronica Hale's eyes, or the quiet distance in Ethan's. But pretending doesn't quiet the ache. It just teaches it to hum beneath your skin. She arrived early, before the office lights were even on. Her plan was simple: get through the day, avoid overthinking, and keep whatever was left of her peace intact. But fate, as always, had other plans. It was around 10 when Veronica appeared again, not at the lounge this time, not passing by with that perfect smile, but right at Emily's desk. "Good morning," Veronica said lightly, as if they were old friends meeting by chance. "Do you have a minute?" Emily hesitated, glancing toward the empty hallway. "Of course." Veronica gestured toward the small conference room by the corner. "Let's talk somewhere quieter." Inside, the air felt colder. The glass walls made everything look exposed, and the city stretched beyond them, distant, indifferent. Veronica didn't sit right away. She placed her bag neatly on the table, then turned, her voice calm, almost gentle. "I owe you some honesty," she said. Emily frowned slightly. "About what Ethan—" The name came out smooth, deliberate. "You see, he and I have history. Not gossip, not speculation, real history." Emily's pulse quickened. She stayed silent, fingers tightening around the edge of her notebook. "We were engaged," Veronica continued. 3 years ago, the wedding was planned, the invitations sent, and then, 3 days before it, he walked away. The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Emily's first instinct was disbelief, not because she thought Veronica was lying, but because she didn't want it to be true. "He left?" she asked softly. Veronica nodded, her expression unreadable. No explanation, no warning, just gone. Emily swallowed hard. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," Veronica said, taking a slow breath, "I see the way he looks at you. I recognize it." Her tone shifted, still calm, but softer, almost pitying. "Ethan Ward doesn't fall in love. Emily, he admires, he obsesses, he builds entire worlds around people, and then, When they get too close, he tears it all down. He's brilliant at beginnings, terrible at endings. Emily tried to find words, but her throat felt tight. People change, she said quietly. Veronica's smile was faint, almost kind, maybe. But men like Ethan don't change out of love. They change out of loss. And even then, it never lasts. There was no venom in her voice, just certainty, experience. Silence filled the room. The faint hum of the air vent, the ticking of her watch, everything felt too loud. When Emily finally spoke, her voice was small. Maybe he's different now. Veronica tilted her head. I hope you're right, she said softly. But you look like someone who still believes people become better just because we want them to. She stepped closer, her perfume faint but expensive, her eyes steady. Be careful, Emily. He'll make you feel seen completely, absolutely seen, and then he'll vanish. And you'll wonder if you imagined all of it. Emily's hands trembled. You don't know how he is with me. Veronica smiled, sad and knowing. That's what I once said to someone, too. Then she picked up her bag, gave a polite nod, and walked out. The door closed with a soft click that felt louder than it should have. Emily stood there for a moment, trying to breathe. The city beyond the glass seemed distant, unreal skyscrapers like memories she couldn't reach. She sat down slowly, her reflection faint on the table's surface. 1,000 thoughts rushed through her, colliding and dissolving. Maybe Veronica was wrong. Maybe this was jealousy disguised as advice. But still, the story had the ring of something that couldn't be invented. When she finally left the room, the hallway felt longer. The chatter of coworkers faded behind her, replaced by the thud of her own footsteps. By the time she reached her desk, she saw Ethan walking out of his office, phone in hand. He looked up, caught her gaze, and for a moment, the warmth in his eyes was still there. But beneath it, she saw something else now, something she couldn't unsee. Hey, he said softly, stopping beside her. Everything okay? She wanted to say yes, wanted to meet that calm confidence with her usual smile, but the words stuck. All she could manage was a small nod. He studied her for a second longer, concern flickering across his face. You sure? Just tired, she said quickly. Long morning. He smiled faintly, the kind that had once made her stomach flutter. Get some air later. You work too hard. And just like that, he was gone, swallowed by the elevator, his reflection fading in the mirrored doors. Emily sat back down, staring at the numbers on her screen without seeing them. The world around her went on, as if nothing had changed. But inside, something had shifted, something small but irrevocable. That evening, when she stepped out into the fading light, she found herself glancing up again at the 40th floor, where his office lights still burned. She thought of Veronica's words. He doesn't know how to love for long. The wind picked up, carrying the chill off the river. Maybe Veronica was wrong, maybe not. But one thing was certain from this moment on. Emily Carter would never look at Ethan Ward the same way again. And though she didn't know it yet, that quiet fracture, that hairline crack in her faith, would be the beginning of everything that came next. The days after that conversation felt like winter had moved into Emily's chest. Quiet, slow, empty in a way she couldn't name. Ethan was still there in the same meetings, the same halls, but it was as if someone had turned the volume of him down. He spoke less, smiled less. The glances that once carried a private warmth now stopped short, replaced by polite distance. At first, she told herself it was work. Deadlines, pressure. That's what he did. He disappeared into focus when things got heavy. But deep down, she knew this wasn't that. This was withdrawal, a careful undoing of closeness, one quiet day at a time. He canceled dinner once, then twice. The third time, he didn't even call, just sent a short text. Can we rain check on Barry tonight? No apology, no warmth. Emily stared at the message until the screen dimmed. The same phone that had once lit up her nights now felt like a stranger's voice. By Friday, the space between them had become impossible to ignore. He walked past her desk without stopping. His tone in meetings was brisk, almost mechanical. But the hardest part wasn't his words. It was the way he avoided her eyes. That's when she knew whatever had begun between them was breaking. And it wasn't an accident. That evening, she climbed the steps to the 40th floor, the floor that had once felt like magic, now heavy with dread. The hallway was empty except for the low hum of air conditioning. His office door stood half open, the light inside soft and golden. "Ethan," she said quietly. He looked up from his desk. The faintest flicker crossed his face. Surprise? Maybe guilt? "Emily, you're still here? I needed to talk to you." He leaned back slowly, arms crossing over his chest. About what? The calmness in his voice wasn't real. She could feel the tension underneath, the kind that only comes when someone's already rehearsed what they're going to say. "You've been distant," she said, her voice steady but low. "You don't have to pretend you haven't." He sighed, long and quiet, then looked away toward the window. "It's not you." Her stomach dropped. "Don't say that," she whispered. "It's not." He repeated, firmer this time. "You didn't do anything wrong." Then what? He hesitated. For a second, the silence was so thick she could hear the faint ticking of his watch. Then finally, he spoke, voice low, uneven. "I can't do this. Not again." Her breath caught. "Do what?" "Get close to someone. Start something I don't know how to finish." She took a small step closer. "You're scared," she said softly. He looked at her then, and the truth was all over his face, the kind of fear that doesn't come from not caring, but from caring too much. "I've been here before." "Emily," he said, "with someone I thought I could love, I told myself I'd changed, that I could handle it, and then I broke it anyway." Her throat tightened. "You're not that man anymore." He gave a hollow laugh. "You don't know that. I do," she said. "Because I've seen the way you look at me. I've felt what's real between us." He closed his eyes for a moment, exhaling through clenched teeth. "That's what makes it worse, because I do feel it, and that's exactly why I have to stop." The words hit like glass breaking in her chest. "So, you're just going to walk away?" she asked. "Because it's safer." His silence was answer enough. Something inside her cracked, not loud, not sudden, just the slow giving way of something she'd held too tightly. "You think hurting me now is kinder than risking it?" Later, she said quietly, "You think leaving me before you even try will make me less broken?" He didn't answer. He just looked at her eyes full of everything he wouldn't say. For a moment, she thought she saw regret there, maybe even love. But it came too late. Her voice trembled. "You're not protecting me. Ethan. You're protecting yourself." That struck something in him. His jaw tightened, his hands curling against the edge of the desk. But he didn't argue. The quiet between them stretched. It was the kind of silence that fills a room when two people both know it's over, but neither wants to be the first to leave. Finally, she said the words she never thought she'd say. "I can't do this." He looked up sharply. "Emily, I can't keep trying to reach someone who's already halfway out the door." Her voice broke then. She didn't try to stop the tears. They came softly, quietly, the kind that burn because they're too honest to hide. He stood, as if to go to her, but she stepped back. "Don't," she whispered. "Please don't make this harder." He froze. And that was the last thing he gave her, stillness. When she finally turned toward the door, her hands were shaking. She didn't look back. She couldn't. Outside, the hallway was empty. The city beyond, the glass glinting cold and silver. The elevator took too long to come, and in that endless wait, she realized something she hadn't wanted to face. Sometimes love doesn't end because it stops existing. It ends because one person is too afraid to let it grow. When the doors closed behind her, she pressed her palm against the cool metal, breathing in the ache that filled her chest. Upstairs, in that golden-lit office, Ethan Ward stood motionless, staring at the spot where she'd been. His reflection in the glass looked composed, unbothered, but his eyes told a different story. He whispered something under his breath, too low for anyone to hear. Maybe her name, maybe an apology, but down below, in the quiet hum of the elevator descending, Emily Carter already knew this was the sound of something beautiful breaking. And once something breaks that quietly, it never goes back to the same shape again. The city had already changed seasons by the time it happened, late November. The air cold enough to sting, the trees along the lake stripped bare, the wind carrying that dry whisper that meant winter was coming soon. 3 weeks had passed since the night Emily walked out of Ethan's office. She hadn't seen him since. Not once. She told herself she was fine, threw herself into work. Long hours, empty weekends, quiet nights spent pretending that moving on was a choice, not a process. But sometimes, in those sleepless hours before dawn, she'd still catch herself whispering his name into the dark, just to hear how it sounded when it didn't belong to her anymore. Then, one Friday morning, the call came. It was 6:17 a.m. Emily was standing in her kitchen, coffee brewing, when her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something in her chest told her to. Ms. Carter. A man's voice, calm, professional. This is St. Luke's Hospital. You're listed as an emergency contact for Mr. Ethan Ward. The cup slipped from her hand. It hit the floor and shattered, scattering coffee and porcelain across the tile. Her voice barely came out. What happened? There's been an accident, the voice said gently. Highway I-90, his car went off the road late last night. He's stable now, but he's unconscious. We thought you should know. For a moment, the world stopped, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock. Everything went silent. All she could hear was her own heartbeat, loud and uneven. She didn't remember the drive, only the gray blur of the highway, the rhythm of the wipers against sleet, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tight they ached. When she reached the hospital, the air smelled of antiseptic and cold metal. The receptionist gave her a room number, and before she knew it, she was standing outside his door, her hand trembling on the handle. He looked smaller, somehow, pale against the white sheets, a bandage at his temple, IV lines trailing from his arm. Machines beeped softly, keeping time with his breath. For a long while, she just stood there, afraid to sit, afraid to move. She wanted to be angry at him, at fate, at the cruel way life kept forcing her to care when she'd just learned how to let go. But all she felt was an ache so deep it made her chest tighten. She sat beside him, finally, her fingers brushing his hand. It was cold, too cold. "Ethan," she whispered, voice trembling. "What were you doing out there?" The nurse who came in later told her the car had skidded on black ice. He'd been driving alone, fast, late at night. They weren't sure where he was heading. Emily did. Somehow, she knew. He'd been coming to find her. Hours passed. The room stayed quiet except for the steady rhythm of the monitors. She watched his face, the same face she'd memorized once in the glow of candlelight, and wondered if he'd known, even before the crash, that she would still come when he needed her. When his hand twitched slightly, she almost didn't believe it. Then his eyelids fluttered, a faint frown forming, as if he was trying to fight his way back. "Ethan," she said softly, leaning forward. He stirred again. Breath shallow, his voice was barely a whisper. "Emily." She froze, tears welling instantly. "I'm here," she said. "I'm right here." He turned his head slightly toward her, his eyes still heavy, unfocused. "I was coming to you." Her throat tightened. Why he swallowed hard, every word a struggle. I needed to say I was wrong. She shook her head, tears spilling now. "Don't do this now. You need to rest." But he didn't stop. His voice was fragile, almost breaking. I thought walking away would protect you. I told myself I was saving you from me. His fingers twitched again, reaching weakly for hers. She took his hand, clutching it tight. He looked at her, finally really looked, eyes glassy but full of something achingly human. But I hurt you anyway. She pressed her lips together, trying to hold back the sob rising in her chest. You did, she whispered. You really did. His breath hitched, a faint smile ghosting at the corner of his mouth. I was on my way to fix it. I didn't want it to end like that. He paused, as if the effort cost him too much. The machines beeped steadily, but every sound felt like it was counting down something fragile. I love you, Emily, he said finally, barely audible. That's all I came to say. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The words landed softly, but with the weight of everything she'd been waiting to hear and everything she hadn't dared to hope for. She leaned forward, resting her forehead gently against his hand. You idiot, she whispered, voice shaking. You should have told me before the highway did. A quiet laugh escaped him, weak and short, but real. She stayed there for hours, even after he fell asleep again, her fingers never leaving his. Every once in a while, his hand would twitch, like he was still trying to reach for her in dreams. When the nurse came to check the monitors, Emily stood by the window, looking out over the city, the skyline washed in gray, snow beginning to fall. There was something almost poetic about it, she thought. How life has a way of breaking people open just when they've learned to close. How love sometimes finds its way back, not through grand gestures, but through broken roads and near losses. As night settled, she pulled the chair closer to his bed, wrapped the blanket around herself, and whispered, You're here. That's enough. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and endless. The city lights blurred behind it, and for the first time in weeks, she let herself cry not from pain this time, but from the fragile relief of having him still breathing, still within reach. And though she didn't know what tomorrow would bring, she knew this if he woke up again. If he meant those words, she would listen. Because sometimes love isn't about trusting someone never to hurt you. It's about trusting that, even after the hurt, they'll find their way back. And somewhere between the quiet hum of the machines and the whisper of snow against glass, Emily Carter let that truth settle deep in her heart, a promise waiting for morning. The snow outside had stopped by morning, leaving the city washed in quiet light. The hospital room felt softer now, warmer somehow, the kind of calm that comes after a storm has passed. The steady beep of the monitors was slower, steadier, almost like a lullaby. Emily sat in the same chair she'd been in all night, one hand still wrapped around Ethan's. She hadn't moved much, afraid that if she did, the moment would disappear. He stirred just after dawn. His breathing shifted, his fingers twitching slightly against hers. She looked up as his eyes opened, still fogged with exhaustion but clear enough to find her face. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The quiet between them wasn't heavy this time. It was full of everything that had been left unsaid. You're still here? He murmured. His voice was rough, weak, but his lips curved faintly. I'm not going anywhere, she said softly. You're stuck with me. That made him smile. A small, fragile smile, but real. He tried to sit up, grimacing as pain flickered across his face. Emily leaned forward immediately. Hey, don't move too fast. He looked at her, eyes serious now. You shouldn't be here, he said quietly. Her chest tightened. Why not? Because I hurt you. Because you deserve someone who doesn't make you wait by hospital beds. She shook her head slowly. Stop. Her voice trembled, but her eyes didn't waver. You don't get to decide what I deserve. He stared at her for a long moment, then let out a breath that sounded almost like surrender. Emily, I don't know how to do this. I've spent my whole life trying to control everything, every risk, every feeling, every chance to get hurt. And it's always the same. I end up alone anyway. She reached up, brushing his hand gently with her thumb. You're not alone right now. He closed his eyes, a quiet tear slipping free before he could stop it. I don't know how to love without breaking things, he whispered. Then maybe, she said softly, it's time you learn. The words hung there simple, but true. And something in him shifted. He turned his hand, threading his fingers through hers. His grip was weak but certain, like a promise finding its shape. I was scared, he admitted, scared of losing control, scared of failing, scared of you seeing the parts of me I've spent years hiding. I already saw them, she said, and I stayed. His breath caught. For a moment, he couldn't look at her, couldn't stand the weight of her kindness. Then, finally, he did. And what she saw in his eyes wasn't the polished CEO, the confident man who commanded rooms. It was someone raw, open, human. Emily, he said quietly, if you give me another chance, I swear, I won't run this time. I'll stop fighting what's real. I'll stop trying to control the ending. Her throat tightened. You mean that? He nodded slowly. For the first time in a long time, yes. She studied him, the faint bruise at his temple, the lines of exhaustion on his face, and realized that love wasn't always about perfection. Sometimes it was about the courage to begin again after breaking. I forgive you, she said simply. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't grand. It was quiet, but it landed deep. His eyes closed, a shaky breath leaving his chest, like something heavy had finally been released. When he opened them again, they were clearer, calmer. I don't deserve you, he whispered. Maybe not, she said with a faint smile, but I still choose you. He laughed softly, then winced at the movement. That sounds like a terrible deal for you. Probably, she said, but I'm okay with that. They sat like that for a while, hands still joined, silence stretching between them, but no longer empty. Every heartbeat felt like a word, every shared glance a promise that they were done running. The nurse came in a little later, smiling quietly when she saw them. You've got quite the visitor, she said to Ethan. I'm starting to think I got lucky, he replied, voice still rough. When the nurse left, Emily stood to adjust his blanket, fussing the way she always did when she was nervous. He caught her hand mid-motion. Stay, he said softly. Just for a minute. She nodded and sat again, her hand finding its familiar place in his. His thumb brushed lightly over her knuckles. You know, he said after a long pause, when I woke up and saw you there, I thought I was dreaming. She smiled faintly. You thought I'd given up on you. He looked at her, eyes warm. I thought I'd lost the right to ask you not to. Her reply came quietly, steady as breath. You never lost that. You just forgot how to believe it. Something in him softened then, that constant tension that lived in his shoulders, that sharp edge that came from too many years of holding everything in. It faded, piece by piece. I don't know what happens next, he said finally. You don't have to, she whispered. We'll figure it out, together. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in months, maybe years, Ethan Ward let himself rest, not because he was tired, but because he finally felt safe enough to. Emily watched him drift back to sleep, his hand still warm in hers. The morning light filtered through the blinds, painting soft gold across his face. For a long time, she just sat there, memorizing the quiet, the fragile peace that came after too much noise. Love, she thought, wasn't about never breaking. It was about having the courage to rebuild, piece by piece, with both hands still trembling. And as she leaned her head against the edge of his bed, listening to the rhythm of his breath, Emily Carter knew this wasn't an ending at all. It was the first page of something real, something earned. The kind of love that no longer ran from fear, but learned to walk through it. The morning light in Lincoln Park had its own kind of rhythm, soft and slow, filtering through the big bay window that looked out onto a line of maple trees. 6 months had passed since the hospital. The bruises had faded, the wounds had healed, but something far more tender had begun to take root between them. Life wasn't perfect. It wasn't even smooth, but it was real. The apartment they shared wasn't grand. It was small, warm, and full of mismatched things. A worn leather sofa Ethan couldn't let go of. Emily's stack of photo books near the window. The faint smell of coffee and toast lingering in the air. Every morning had become a quiet ritual. She made breakfast. He read the news out loud in that calm, deep voice that used to sound like command but now carried something softer. Home. Sometimes they fought, usually about small things. The dishes, the thermostat, Ethan's habit of answering emails at midnight, Emily's tendency to leave her camera gear all over the dining table. The arguments never lasted long. They'd start sharp, words quick and tight, and end with one of them laughing, first usually her. He'd sigh then, step close, kiss the top of her head, and whisper, "You're impossible." "Good," she'd reply. "You need impossible." And somehow, that was true. Ethan Ward, the man who once planned every move like a chess master, was learning what it meant to live without a script, to let the world be messy and unpredictable, to let love be something you don't manage but meet. In the evenings, they cooked together. Or rather, she cooked, and he tried not to ruin things. The first time he'd offered to make pasta, the sauce had ended up everywhere except the pot. She'd laughed so hard she cried, and instead of being offended, he'd just stood there, apron splattered, grinning like a boy. "Stop laughing," he'd said, pretending to scowl. "I can't." She'd giggled. "You're stirring with a spoon like it's a business deal." "Well," he said dryly, "at least I didn't burn the garlic this time." That night, they ate slightly overcooked spaghetti on the couch, wrapped in blankets. A bottle of wine between them. Somewhere in the middle of it, as she leaned her head against his shoulder, he'd whispered, "I never thought I'd like normal this much." She smiled, half asleep. Normal's underrated. He'd nodded, eyes drifting toward the city lights outside. Not this kind of normal. There were still moments when old habits slipped in, when work calls ran late, when silence stretched between them because he didn't know how to explain what was in his head. Those were the nights she'd quietly turn off her laptop, walk over, and sit beside him without saying a word. Sometimes he'd take her hand, sometimes he wouldn't. But either way, they stayed close. He was learning that love didn't always need to be solved, it just needed to be shared. One Sunday, as the afternoon sun poured across the living room, Emily found him standing by the window, lost in thought. She walked up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "How quiet everything feels. Do you miss the noise?" He turned, resting his forehead against hers. "No, for once, I don't." They stood like that for a long moment, breathing in sync, the city hum faint in the distance. That evening, she pulled out her camera for the first time in months. She'd stopped taking pictures when everything fell apart, afraid of capturing moments that might hurt later. But now, watching him move around their small kitchen, sleeves rolled up, focused, and a little clumsy, she couldn't resist. "Don't move," she said softly. He looked up, puzzled. "Why? Because you look happy." He froze, then smiled that rare, unguarded smile she'd grown to love. "That's your doing," he said. Click! The sound of the shutter filled the room. She lowered the camera slowly, her heart swelling in that quiet, almost painful way that only real love brings. Later that night, as they sat on the couch, lights dim, music low, Ethan reached over and took her hand. His thumb brushed gently over her ring finger. Not a question. Not yet. Just a touch that said someday. "I'm still figuring this out," he admitted quietly. "How to be with someone and not hide behind work, or fear, or whatever it was I used to call control." She smiled, turning her hands so their fingers fit together. You're doing fine. He chuckled softly. You mean for a guy who can't cook and used to be emotionally unavailable? For that guy, she said, resting her head on his shoulder, you're doing pretty great. The clock ticked softly in the background. The world outside their window kept spinning cars, people, endless noise, but inside that small apartment, time felt slower. This was what healing looked like. Not grand gestures or dramatic speeches, just two people showing up every day, choosing each other, even when it was hard, even when it was quiet. And as the night stretched on, Ethan leaned over, pressing a soft kiss to her hair. You know, he murmured, I used to think strength was about control. And now she asked, he paused, thinking, now I think it's about staying, even when it's easier to run. She looked up at him then, her eyes warm and steady. Then I guess we're both strong, she said. He smiled. Yeah, maybe we are. Outside, the streetlights flickered on one by one, painting the snow-covered sidewalks in soft gold. The city moved, but for them, everything stood still quiet, tender, alive. In that small apartment in Lincoln Park, two people who had once been strangers to trust were now learning how to belong not perfectly, not forever, but fully, in the only way that mattered. And somewhere between the clatter of dishes, the sound of laughter, and the slow rhythm of their shared breathing, love found its home again. Morning slid into their kitchen like a soft song. Sunlight on the maple leaves, the kettle beginning to whisper, the smell of toast drifting through the small Lincoln Park apartment. Emily stood at the counter, hair tied back, reading an email on her phone while the coffee dripped in a slow rhythm. Behind her, Ethan buttoned his shirt, pausing at the window the way he always did, as if the city could answer questions he hadn't learned to ask out loud. You're thinking again? She said without turning. I'm learning, he answered, a smile in his voice. Thinking less, asking more. She glanced back, asking how to keep what matters, and still build what needs building. Coffee finished, cups warm in their hands, a quiet clink, a breath shared. By 8, the elevator swallowed them, and Helios rose around them like a machine that knew their names. Floor lights blinked past. The doors opened on 34, then 40. Every step was familiar, but something in the air felt new, a small current running beneath the day, tugging softly at the edges. The boardroom was already humming, slides waiting, voices low. A West Coast fund had asked for a deeper integration plan, hard questions, timelines, risks. Emily took her seat along the wall, not because she belonged there, but because old habits sometimes arrive first. Ethan took the head of the table, no tie, steady hands. They began, forecasts, head count, supplier constraints. Someone flagged a compliance bottleneck. Another pointed to runway. The COO spoke too fast, the CTO too carefully. Ethan listened that new kind of listening she'd learned to trust, eyes steady, jaw relaxed, notes short and clean. Half an hour in, a modeling error surfaced, subtle but real. The room shifted. A few glances darted toward Ethan, then toward the spreadsheet blinking on the screen. Emily saw it before anyone else, a column reference off by 2 cells. A cascade that thinned margins just enough to make honest people nervous. She didn't raise her hand. She stood, quietly crossed to the console, and with a calm voice that surprised even her, said, Line F36 should anchor to C, not E. 3 clicks, a breath. The chart corrected, margin slim but safe. The room exhaled. Ethan didn't look at the screen first. He looked at her. That new look he wore now, less steel, more seeing. Thank you, Emily. 2 words, but they felt like a door unlocking. The rest of the meeting moved like water around rock. Questions, answers, decisions that landed with the soft weight of confidence. When it ended, chairs scraped back and a handful of people lingered the way people do when they're relieved and not sure what to do with their relief. Ms. Carter, Ethan said, voice low enough that it belonged only to her. Stay a minute. She stayed. The room emptied. The lights seemed warmer. The city lifted in the windows like a promise. He wheeled the screen aside and sat not at the head, but along the side, closer to where she stood. No desk between them, no stage. I've been working on something, he said. Quietly? Carefully? She felt her pulse move up into her throat. Work something or life something. Both, he said, and the word held. Mostly work right now, because I think the way we work is how we take care of the life part. She waited, hands loose at her sides, breath even. I need a chief of staff, he said simply. Not a gatekeeper, not a fixer, a partner, someone who knows how the pieces fit when the room goes quiet. Someone who will tell me the truth when it's inconvenient, and protect the center when everything else is loud. The words landed slow, one after the other, like stones laid into a path. I want that someone to be you. Silence. Then the faintest tremor of laughter escaped her. Not disbelief, just the soft shock of being seen this precisely. Ethan? He held her gaze. This isn't a favor. It isn't us. It's your work. The way you see systems people pretend are simple. The way you move when it matters. He paused, choosing each word like it needed to earn its place. It's trust. Her eyes dropped to the table, to her reflection in the glass, small, steady, a little startled. You know the whispers this will invite. I do, he said, which is why I've already spoken to legal and HR. Clear reporting lines, compensation set at market, an executive mentor outside my chain, quarterly oversight by the board's governance committee, and you'll have veto power on my calendar. His mouth tipped, half grin. That might be the most valuable part. She swallowed a smile that wanted to break free. And if I say no, then we keep walking, he said gently. You stay where you are, and I'll learn to want this less. He let the sentence breathe, but I don't think I can want it less. Her heartbeat folded into the quiet. She thought of late nights and small miracles, of pasta sauce and apologies, of the hospital window and the way his hand had searched for hers without waking. She thought of the girl who used to dream of cameras, and the woman who now knew that sometimes leadership looked exactly like the way a lens holds a frame honest, steady, forgiving. What would it look like, she asked, day to day? You'd own my bandwidth, he said, soft. Shape the week. Guard the long term when the day-to-day gets loud. Build the rhythm for the exec team, not by force, but by presence. You'll sit in every room I sit in, and a few I shouldn't. You'll say the thing I won't see, and I'll learn to listen faster. He leaned back, a breath of humor easing the edges. You'll also tell me to go home when I forget I live somewhere. She met his eyes again. Autonomy, real, he said, and if I ever blur a line that compromises you, you pull the brake. On me. She let the idea expand inside her chest. Weight, meaning, a chance to orchestrate the music instead of just playing it. Then I'd want a condition. Name it. We don't bring our hardest moments to the office, she said, and we don't bring the office to the dinner table. If one of us slips, the other names it kindly. Deal. His answer was a whisper that landed like a vow. Deal. Her yes wasn't a single word, so much as a shift. Shoulders loosening, breath leaving on a small laugh she couldn't hold back. Okay, she said at last, and the okay was bright with nerves and certain with peace. Okay. Something in him softened in a way she'd only seen a few times, a private relief, a boyish light that made the room feel wider. He stood, not quickly, and reached for her hand as if he were asking permission to hold the future and not just her fingers. She gave it. Then we're a team, he said. We've been one, she answered. This just makes it official. He exhaled, a smile he couldn't quite control bending his mouth. There's more. She raised an eyebrow. More than my entire life changing before lunch. He reached into his jacket and placed a slim, matte folder on the table, inside the job description she would have written if someone had asked her who she had grown to be. Compensation, authority, a short note, in blue ink, careful and human. For the way you hold the room when it breaks, for the way you hold me when I do. You. Her throat tightened. She closed the folder and slid it back toward him. Not because she was unsure, but because words can fall apart if you don't let silence carry them first. Announce it this afternoon, she said finally, and let me be the one to brief the team. He nodded, trust, again. Passed across a table like water, taken, not spilled. At 3, she stood before the exec's hands steady, voice even, and laid out the cadence that would carry them through the next quarter. Not grand, not loud, clear, the kind of clarity that makes people sit up straighter without knowing why. When she finished, the COO smiled like he'd been waiting to exhale. The CTO asked a question, not because he doubted, but because he wanted to be part of it. Ethan didn't interrupt once. He just watched the way someone watches a landmark take its place on a map they've been carrying too long. After, in the quiet of the hall, he touched her elbow. A small touch, a thank you that didn't need a word. Evening returned them to maple leaves and the soft scrape of keys in their own front door. She took off her shoes, he loosened his collar, and the apartment exhaled with them. While water simmered on the stove, she laid the matte folder on the table and set her camera beside it, as if the old dream and the new one needed to sit near each other for a while. Chief of Staff, he said, voice low, almost teasing. How does it feel? She tasted the answer before she spoke it. Like the right door. He stepped closer. No speech this time. No pitch. Just a kiss that held the same steady promise as the afternoon had. Not fireworks, but a lighthouse. Not louder. Truer. They ate. They laughed. They argued softly about tomatoes versus cream. Then laughed again because they were terrible at arguing when the future was sitting between them on a kitchen table. Later, when the city dimmed and the apartment settled into its nighttime hum, Ethan drew a breath that sounded like a page turning. There's one more question, he said quietly, eyes on her hand, thumb brushing the place where someday might live. Not tonight, not yet, but soon. She didn't rush him, she didn't tease. She just placed her palm over his and let the quiet say yes to a future that hadn't asked out loud. Outside, a breeze lifted the leaves, a soft rustle against the glass. Inside, 2 people who had once been very good at running stood very still, and found that staying could be the bravest move of all. And in the thin space between today's vow and tomorrow's question, something gentle took root, a small, shining certainty that the next knock at their door would carry a different kind of invitation. The morning light spilled gently across their kitchen table, golden, quiet, familiar. Chicago was waking outside the window. The street below painted with soft motion, a jogger with a red scarf, a vendor setting up coffee on the corner, the faint hum of a city that had learned to live between chaos and calm. Inside, the kettle whistled, the toast popped, and a small white envelope lay waiting beside Emily's cup. She'd found it in the mailbox the night before. Cream paper, gold trim, neat lettering that read Veronica Hale and Daniel Cross. The wedding invitation. The same Veronica who once had been a shadow between them. A reminder of everything that almost broke. Ethan came in, barefoot, shirt still unbuttoned, his hair slightly messy from sleep. He carried 2 mugs, one for her, one for himself, and smiled when he saw her holding the card. So, he said softly, it finally happened. Emily nodded. Yeah. She turned the envelope over, tracing the embossed letters with her thumb. She's marrying Daniel, Los Angeles, next month. He leaned against the counter, watching her face. Are you okay? I am, she said, and meant it, I guess. It's strange to see her name like this, to remember how different everything was back then. He nodded, quiet, the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. She smiled faintly, eyes still on the card. "You know," she said after a moment, "if I hadn't sent that voice note to the wrong person, none of this would have happened." Ethan's eyes softened. That wrong person. Huh? She laughed the kind of laugh that carried both memory and forgiveness. "You were supposed to be a 5-second rant to Rachel, not a whole life." He set down his cup, walked to her, and touched her chin gently so she'd meet his eyes. "Some mistakes," he said, his voice low and warm, "are really just shortcuts written by fate." She tilted her head, smiling. "That's poetic for a man who once said emotions were inefficient variables." He grinned. "I had a good teacher." Outside, sunlight caught on the edge of the window pane, scattering a soft gleam across the table. The invitation sat there, a tiny symbol of how things could have gone and how they didn't. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world moved quietly around them, the city breathing, the kettle cooling, the faint buzz of a phone somewhere under a stack of papers. Emily reached out, folded the card neatly back into its envelope, and placed it in a drawer beside old photos, receipts, and a small Polaroid of them from last winter. Laughing, cheeks red, eyes bright. "There," she said, "let it live with the rest of our accidents." He watched her, smiling softly. "You keep everything. Only the things that remind me we survived." He stepped behind her then, wrapping his arms around her waist. His chin rested on her shoulder. His breath touched her neck. They stood that way for a while, not needing words. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft heartbeat of two lives rebuilt. "Emily," he said after a while, voice barely above a whisper. You ever think about that first day? The meeting? The elevator? The way I couldn't figure out why you made me nervous." She turned slightly, smiling. "You mean the day you thought I was too quiet?" "I still think you're quiet," he said. "You just speak differently now. I hear you everywhere." Her eyes softened. "And you finally learned to listen." He chuckled, brushing his lips lightly against her hair. "Guess we both learned something." They stood together, watching the city outside the buildings bathed in morning light, the L train rumbling faintly in the distance. It was the same skyline that had once felt cold and unreachable, but now it looked alive, kind, even. Emily picked up her coffee, took a slow sip, and smiled to herself. "You know," she said, almost to the air, "if someone told me that one wrong tap on my phone would lead to all this, I'd have laughed. And I'd have called it statistically impossible," Ethan said. She looked at him, and yet, he nodded, the hint of a grin playing at the corner of his mouth. And yet, there was a pause, the kind that hums with quiet gratitude. He reached for her hand then, his thumb tracing slow circles against her skin. "To beautiful mistakes," he murmured. She squeezed his hand back. "To the ones that change everything." Outside, a soft breeze stirred the trees along the street, sending a flurry of golden leaves dancing past the window. The light caught them just right, fleeting, imperfect, and stunning. Emily leaned against him, watching them fall, and in that stillness, coffee cooling, city breathing, heart steady, everything that once hurt had found its place. The fear, the missteps, the pride, the apology, all of it had led here. A morning in Chicago, a small apartment, two people who once stumbled into each other's lives and never quite found a reason to leave. He looked down at her, eyes soft. "You ever regret it?" She smiled, sending that message. "Yeah." She shook her head slowly. "Not for a second. It was the most beautiful accident of my life." His answer came as a whisper, a smile carried in sound. "Then let's keep making beautiful mistakes." She laughed quietly, her head resting against his chest, his heartbeat slow and certain beneath her ear. The city outside glowed brighter, the light stretching farther now, spilling across their faces, their coffee cups, the table that still held traces of toast crumbs and shared mornings. And as the camera of the world seemed to pull back out through the window, across the skyline, over the shining river, their small laughter lingered, soft and steady, carried by the hum of a city that had learned to forgive its own noise. Because sometimes, the story that changes your life doesn't begin with perfection. It begins with a slip, a breath, a single, accidental word sent to the wrong person who somehow turned out to be the right one. And that, Emily thought as she reached for his hand once more, was the most beautiful kind of fate. Sometimes, life doesn't unfold the way we plan it. We make mistakes, a wrong message, a wrong word, a moment of pride or fear. And yet, those same missteps often guide us toward what truly matters. Emily and Ethan's story reminds us that love, forgiveness, and second chances rarely arrive wrapped in perfection. They come quietly, through moments of humility and the courage to stay when running would be easier. In our later years, it becomes clear that life's beauty often hides inside its imperfections. Every wrong turn, every misunderstanding, every heartache, they shape us, soften us, teach us how to see each other more kindly. So, when things don't go as planned, take a breath. Trust that even in mistakes, there may be meaning. Sometimes the most beautiful chapters of our lives begin not with success or certainty, but with a stumble. That leads us exactly where we're meant to be. Because in the end, it's not about having a flawless life. It's about learning to love, forgive, and begin again. One quiet morning at a time. Thank you, dear friends, for staying until the end of this story. If Emily and Ethan's journey touched your heart, even just a little, please take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who might need a gentle reminder about love and second chances. And subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt stories like this one. Your support helps us keep creating moments that heal, inspire, and remind us all that it's never too late to begin again.